Let's go. Blog time, blog time, blog time, blog time, blog time, blog time. I forget. Yeah. Not that. Okay, good. Alright, I think we have 2 more chapters until part 2. So we can just finish part 1 today. And then that's it. Okay. Let's do this. So our next chapter is called The Goodness of Show Business. And we have 2 quotes. The name Jimmy is a household word in New England, a nickname for the boy next door. And that is from the book The House That Jimmy Built. And the other one is, I've made a long voyage and been to a strange country, and I've seen the dark man very close. Which dark man? I'm kidding. We all know that it's an... We all know. We all know. I'm kidding. You know, just have a little stereotypical fun. I'm kidding. Feels like the type of jokes one would kill people over. Anyways, let's keep going. There we go. Flickering and feeble, the leukemia remissions in Boston and New York nevertheless mesmerized Farber. If lymphoblastic leukemia, one of the most least lethal forms of cancer, could be thwarted by 2 distinct chemicals, even if only for a month or 2, then perhaps a deeper principle was at stake. Perhaps a series of such poisons was hidden in the chemical world, perfectly designed to obliterate cancer cells but spare normal cells. The fingerling of that idea kept knocking in his mind as he paced up and down the wards every evening, writing notes and examining smears late into the night. Perhaps he had stumbled upon an even more provocative principle, that cancer could be cured by chemicals alone. But how might he jumpstart the discovery of these incredible chemicals? His operation in Boston was clearly far too small. How might he create a more powerful platform to propel himself towards the cure for childhood leukemia, and then for cancer at large? Scientists often study the past as obsessively as historians, because few other professions depend so acutely on it. Every experiment is a conversation with a prior experiment, every new theory a refutation of the old. Farber, too, studied the past compulsively, and the episode that pivotally fascinated him was the story of the National Polio Campaign. As a student at Harvard in the 1920s, Farber had witnessed polio epidemics sweeping through the city, leaving waves of paralyzed children in their wake. In the acute phase of polio, the virus can paralyze the diaphragm, making it nearly impossible to breathe. Even a decade later, in the mid-1930s, the only treatment available for this paralysis was an artificial respirator known as the iron lung. As Farber had rounded on the wards of Children's Hospital as a resident, iron lungs had continuously huffed in the background, with children suspended within these dreaded contraptions often for weeks on end. The suspension of patients inside these iron lungs symbolized the limbo-like paralytic state of polio research. Little was known about the nature of the virus or the biology of the infection, and campaigns to control the spread of polio were poorly advertised and generally ignored by the public. Polio research was shaken out of its torpor by Franklin Roosevelt in 1937. A victim of a prior epidemic, paralyzed from the waist down, Roosevelt had launched a polio hospital and research center called the Warm Springs Foundation in Georgia in 1927. At first, his political advisors tried to distance his image from the disease. A paralyzed president trying to march a nation out of a depression was considered a disastrous image. Roosevelt's public appearances were thus elaborately orchestrated to show him only from the waist up. But re-elected by a staggering margin in 1936, defiant and resurgent Roosevelt returned to his original cause and launched the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, an advocacy group to advance research on and publicize polio. The foundation, the largest disease-focused association in American history, galvanized polio research. Within 1 year of its launch, the actor Eddie Cantor created the March of Dimes campaign for the foundation, a massive and highly coordinated national fundraising effort that asked every citizen to send Roosevelt a dime to support polio education and research. Hollywood celebrities, Broadway stars, and radio personalities soon joined the bandwagon, and the response was dazzling. Within a few weeks, 2,680,000 dimes had poured into the White House. Posters were widely circulated, and money and public attention flooded into polio research. By the late 1940s, funded in part by these campaigns, John Enders had nearly succeeded in culturing poliovirus in his lab, and Sabin and Salk, building on Enders' work, were well on their way to preparing the first polio vaccines. Farber fantasized about a similar campaign for leukemia, perhaps for cancer in general. He envisioned a foundation of children's cancer that would spearhead the effort, but he needed an ally to help launch the foundation, preferably an ally outside the hospital, where he had few allies. And that is a break. Let's keep going. Let's make this a short vlog, because I've spent so long talking in the last vlog that my voice is about to go sore. Alright. Farber did not need to look far. In early May 1947, while Farber was still in the middle of his Hymenopteron trial, a group of men from the Variety Club of New England, led by Bill Coster, toured his laboratory. Founded in 1927 in the state of Philadelphia by a group of men in show business, producers, directors, actors, entertainers, and film theater owners, the Variety Club had initially been modeled after the dining clubs of New York and London. But in 1928, just a year after its inception, the club had unwittingly acquired a more active social agenda. In the winter of 1928, with the city teetering on the abyss of the Depression, a woman had abandoned her child at the doorstep of the Sheridan Film Theater. A note pinned on the child read, "Please take care of my baby. Her name is Catherine. I can no longer take care of her. I have 8 others. My husband is out of work. She was born on Thanksgiving Day. I have always heard of the goodness of show business, and I pray to God that you will look out for her." The cinematic melodrama of the episode and the heartfelt appeal to the goodness of the show business made a deep impression on the members of the fledgling club. Adopting the orphan girl, the club paid for her upbringing and education. She was given the name Catherine Variety Sheridan, her middle name for the club, and her last name for the theater outside which she had been found. The Catherine Sheridan story was widely reported in the press and brought even more media exposure to the club than its members had ever envisioned. Thrust into the public eye as a philanthropic organization, the club now made children's welfare its project. In the late 1940s, as the boom in post-war movie-making brought even more money into the club's coffers, new chapters of the club sprouted in cities throughout the nation. Catherine Sheridan's story and her photograph were printed and publicized in club offices throughout the nation. Sheridan became the club's unofficial mascot. The influx of money and public attention also brought a search for other children's charity projects. Coster's visit to the Children's Hospital in Boston was a scouting mission to find another such project. He was escorted around the hospital to the labs and clinics of prominent doctors. When Coster asked the chief of hematology at Children's for suggestions for donations to the hospital, the chief was characteristically cautious. "Well, I need a new microscope," he said. In contrast, when Coster stopped by Farber's office, he found an excitable, articulate scientist with a larger-than-life vision, a messiah in a box. Farber didn't want a microscope. He had an audacious telescopic plan that captivated Coster. Farber asked the club to help him create a new fund to build a massive research hospital dedicated to children's cancer. Farber and Coster got started immediately. In early 1948, they launched an organization called the Children's Cancer Research Fund to jumpstart research and advocacy around children's cancers. In March 1948, they organized a raffle to raise money and netted $45,456, an impressive amount to start, but still short of what Farber and Coster hoped for. Cancer research, they felt, needed a more effective message, a strategy to catapult it into public fame. Sometime that spring, Coster, remembering the success with Sheridan, had the inspired idea of finding a mascot for Farber's research fund, a Catherine Sheridan for cancer. Coster and Farber searched children's wards and Farber's clinic for a poster child to pitch the fund to the public. It was not a promising quest. Farber was treating several children with amenopterin, and the beds in the wards upstairs were filled with miserable patients, dehydrated and nauseated from chemotherapy, children barely able to hold their heads and bodies up tight, let alone be paraded publicly as optimistic mascots for cancer treatment. Looking frantically through the patient lists, Farber and Coster found a single child healthy enough to carry the message, a lanky, cherubic, blue-eyed blonde child named Einar Gustafsson, who did not have leukemia but was being treated for a rare kind of lymphoma in his intestines. Gustafsson was quiet and serious, a precociously self-assured boy from New Sweden, Maine. His grandparents were Swedish immigrants, and he lived on a potato farm and attended a single-room schoolhouse. In the late summer of 1947, just after blueberry season, he had complained of a gnawing, wrenching pain in his stomach. Doctors in Lewiston, suspecting appendicitis, had operated on his appendix, but found a lymphoma instead. Survival rates for the disease were low at 10%. Thinking that chemotherapy had a slight chance to save him, his doctors sent Gustafsson to Farber's care in Boston. Einar Gustafsson, though, was a mouthful of a name. Farber and Coster, in a flash of inspiration, rechristened him Jimmy. And that is our second break. Let's go. We've got 3 pages. Coster now moved quickly to market Jimmy. On May 22, 1948, on a warm Sunday night on the Northeast, Ralph Edwards, the host of the radio show Truth or Consequences, interrupted his usual broadcast from California and linked to the radio station in Boston. Part of the function of Truth or Consequences, Edward began, is to bring this old parlor game to people who are unable to come to the show. Tonight we take you to a little fellow named Jimmy. We're not going to give you his last name because he's just like thousands of other young fellows and girls in private homes and hospitals all over the country. Jimmy is suffering from cancer. He's a small little guy, and although he cannot figure out why he isn't out with the other kids, he does love his baseball and follows every move of his favorite team, the Boston Braves. Now, by the magic of radio, we're going to span the breadth of the United States and take you right up to the bedside of Jimmy, in one of America's great cities, Boston, Massachusetts, and into one of America's great hospitals, the Children's Hospital in Boston, whose staff is doing such an outstanding job of cancer research. Up to now, Jimmy has not heard us. Give us Jimmy, please. Then, over a crackle of static, Jimmy could be heard. Hi, Jimmy. This is Ralph Edwards of the Truth or Consequences radio program. I've heard you like baseball. Is that right? Yeah, it's my favorite sport. It's your favorite sport. Who do you think is going to win the pennant this year? The Boston Braves, I hope. After more banter, Edwards sprung the parlor trip that he had promised. Have you ever met Phil Massey? No. Hi, Jimmy. My name is Phil Massey. That's Phil Massey walking in. What? Who's that, Jimmy? Phil Massey. And where is he? In my room. Well, what do you know? Right here in your hospital room. Phil Massey from Berlin, Illinois. Who's the best home runner on the team, Jimmy? Jeff Heath. Heath entered the room. Who's that, Jimmy? Jeff Heath. As Jimmy gasped, player after player filled his room bearing t-shirts, signed baseballs, game tickets, and caps. Eddie Stanky, Bob Elliott, Earl Torgenson, Johnny Sane, Alvin Dark, Jim Russell, Tommy Holmes. A piano was wheeled in. The Braves struck up the song, accompanied by Jimmy, who sang loudly and enthusiastically off-key. And then, the old, take me out to the ball game, take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack, I don't care if I never get back. Well, I'm not going to sing that because I'm a terrible fucking singer, especially with this throat of mine. The crowd in Edward's studio cheered, some noting the poignancy of the last line. Many nearly moved to tears. At the end of the broadcast, the remote link from Boston was disconnected. Edwards paused and lowered his voice. Now listen, folks. Jimmy can't hear this, can he? We're not using any photographs of him or using his full name, or he will know about this. Let's make Jimmy and thousands of other boys and girls who are suffering from cancer happy by aiding in the research to help find a cure for cancer in children. Because by researching children's cancer, we automatically help the adults and stop it at the outset. Now we know that one thing little Jimmy wants most is a television set to watch the baseball games as well as hear them. If you and your friends send in your quarters, dollars, and tens of dollars tonight to Jimmy for the Children's Cancer Research Fund, and over $200,000 is contributed to this worthy cause, we'll see to it that Jimmy gets his television set. The Edwards broadcast lasted 8 minutes. Jimmy spoke 12 sentences and sang one song. The word swell was used 5 times. Little was said of Jimmy's cancer. It lurked unmentionably in the background, the ghost in the hospital room. The public response was staggering. Even before the Braves had left Jimmy's room that evening, donors had begun to line up outside the lobby of the Children's Hospital. Jimmy's mailbox was inundated with postcards and letters, some of them addressed simply to Jimmy, Boston, Massachusetts. Some sent dollar bills with their letters or wrote checks. Children mailed in pocket money, in quarters and dimes. The Braves pitched in with their own contributions. By May 1948, the 20,000 mark set by Coster had long been surpassed. More than 231,000 had rolled in. Hundreds of red and white tin cans for donations for the Jimmy Funds were posted outside baseball games. Cans were passed around in film theaters to collect dimes and quarters. Little League players in baseball uniforms went door to door with collection cans on sweltering summer nights. Jimmy Days were held in the small towns throughout New England. Jimmy's promised television, a black and white set with a 12-inch screen set on a wooden box, arrived and was set up in a white bench between hospital beds. In the fast-growing, fast-consuming world of medical research in 1948, the $231,000 raised by the Jimmy Fund was an impressive but still modest sum, enough to build a few floors of a new building in Boston, but far from enough to build a national scientific edifice against cancer. In comparison, in 1944, the Manhattan Project spent $100 million every month at the Oak Ridge site. In 1948, Americans spent more than $126 million on Coca-Cola alone. Sad. But to measure the genius of the Jimmy campaign in dollars and cents is to miss its point. For Farber, the Jimmy campaign was an early experiment, the building of another model. The campaign against cancer, Farber learned, was much like a political campaign. It needed icons, mascots, images, slogans, the strategies of advertising as much as the tools of science. For any onus to rise to political prominence, it needed to be marketed, just as a political campaign needed marketing. A disease needed to transform... A disease needed to be transformed politically before it could be transformed scientifically. Just emptying my lungs there. If Farber's antifolates were his first discovery in oncology, then this critical truth was his second. It set off a seismic transformation in his career that was far outstrip his transformation from a pathologist to a leukemia doctor. The second transformation, from a clinician to an advocate for cancer research, reflected the transformation of cancer itself. The emergence of cancer from its basement into the glaring light of publicity would change the trajectory of this story. It is a metamorphosis that lies at the heart of this book. And that is the end of that chapter. I will do another one, don't worry. This is, oh wow, 1, 2, 3. 3 pages, that's all. And the last chapter of part 1 is called The House That Jimmy Built. And here is 2 quotes again. Etymologically, patient means sufferer. It is not suffering as such that is most deeply feared, but suffering that degrades. And that is from Susan Sontag, Illness as Metaphor. Sidney's Farber's entire purpose consists only of hopeless cases. That is from Medical World News, November 25th, 1966. I think Medical World News should shove that little statement up its ass. Alright. There was a time when Sidney Farber had joked about the smallness of his laboratory. 1 assistant and 10,000 mice, he had called it. In fact, his entire medical life could be measured in single digits. 1 room, the size of a chemist's closet, stuffed into the basement of a hospital. 1 drug, aminopterin, which sometimes briefly extended the life of a child with leukemia. 1 remission in 5, the longest lasting no longer than 1 year. By the early months of 1951, however, Farber's work was growing exponentially, moving far beyond the reaches of his old laboratory. His outpatient clinic, thronged by parents and their children, had been moved outside the hospital to larger quarters in a residential apartment building on the corner of Binney Street and Longwood Avenue. Ooh, Longwood! But even the new clinic was being overloaded. The inpatient wards at Children's had also filled up quickly. Since Farber was considered an intruder by most of the pediatricians at Children's, increasing ward space within the hospital was out of the question. Most of the doctors thought him conceited and inflexible, a hospital volunteer recalled. At Children's, even if there was space for a few of his bodies, there was no more space for his ego. Isolated and angry, Farber now threw himself into fundraising. He needed an entire building to house all his patients. Frustrated in his efforts to galvanize the medical school into building a new cancer center for children, he launched his own effort. He would build a hospital in the face of a hospital. Emboldened by his early fundraising success, Farber devised ever larger drives for research money, relying on his glitzy retinue for Hollywood stars, political barons, sports celebrities, and moneymakers. In 1953, when the Braves franchise left Boston for Milwaukee, Farber and Koster successfully approached the Boston Red Sox to make the Jimmy Fund their official charity. Farber soon found yet another famous recruit, Ted Williams, a young ballplayer of celluloid glamour who had just returned after serving in the Korean War. In August 1953, the Jimmy Fund planned a welcome home Ted party for Williams, a massive fundraising bash with a dinner billed at $100 per plate that raised $150,000. By the end of that year, Williams was a regular visitor at Farber's clinic, often trailing a retinue of tabloid photographers seeking pictures of the great ballplayer with a young cancer patient. The Jimmy Fund became a household name and a household cause. A large white piggy bank for donations, shaped like an enormous baseball, was placed outside the Statler Hotel. Advertisements for the Children's Cancer Research Fund were plastered across billboards throughout Boston. Countless red and white collection canisters, called Jimmy's Cans, sprouted up outside movie theaters. Funds poured in from sources large and small. 100,000 from the NCI, 5,000 from a bean supper in Boston, $111 from a lemonade stand, a few dollars from a children's circus in New Hampshire. By the early summer of 1952, Farber's new building, a large solid cube perched out on the edge of Binney Street, just off Longwood Avenue, was almost ready. It was lean, functional, and modern, self-consciously distinct from the marbled columns and gargoyles of the hospitals around it. One could see the obsessive hand of Farber in the details. A product of the 1930s, Farber was instinctively frugal. You can take the child out of the depression, but you can't take the depression out of the child, Leonard Lauder liked to say about his generation. But with Jimmy's Clinic, Farber pulled out all the stops. The wide cement steps leading up to the front foyer, graded by only an inch so that children could easily climb them, was steam heated against the brutal Boston blizzards that had nearly stopped Farber's work 5 winters before. Upstairs, the clean, well-lit waiting room had whirling carousels and boxes full of toys. A toy electric train, set into a stone mountain, chugged on its tracks. A television set was embedded in the face of the model mountain. If a little girl got attached to a doll, Time reported in 1952, she could keep it. There was more where it came from. A library was filled with hundreds of books, 3 rocking horses, and 2 bicycles. Instead of the usual portraits of dead professors that haunted the corridors of the neighboring hospitals, Farber commissioned an artist to paint full-size pictures of fairy book characters, Snow White, Pinocchio, and Jiminy Cricket. It was Disney World fused with Cancerland. The fanfare and pomp might have led a casual viewer to assume that Farber had almost found his cure for leukemia, and the brand new clinic was his victory lap. But in truth, his goal, a cure for leukemia, still eluded him. His Boston group had now added another drug, a steroid, to their anti-leukemia regimen, and by assiduously combining steroids and antifolates, the remissions had been stretched out by several months. But despite the most aggressive therapy, the leukemia cells eventually grew resistant and recurred, almost furiously. The children who played with the dolls and toy trains in the bright rooms downstairs were inevitably brought back to the glum wards in the hospital, delirious or comatose and in terminal agony. One woman whose child was treated for cancer in Farber's clinic in the early 50s wrote, "Once I discovered that almost all the children I see are doomed to die within a few months, I never cease to be astonished by the cheerful atmosphere that generally prevails. True, upon closer examination, the parents' eyes look suspiciously bright with tears shed and unshed. Some of the children's robust looks, I find, are owing to one of the anti-leukemia drugs that produces a swelling in the body. And there are children with scars, children with horrible swellings on different parts of their bodies, children missing a limb, children with shaved heads, looking pale and wan, clearly as a result of recent surgery, children limping or in wheelchairs, children coughing, and children emaciated. Indeed, the closer one looked, the more sharply the reality hit. Ensconced in his new airy building, with dozens of assistants swirling around him, Farber must have been haunted by that inescapable fact. He was trapped in his own waiting room, still looking for yet another drug to eke out a few more months of remission in his children. His patients, having walked up the fancy steamed stairs to his office, having pranced around on the musical carousel and immersed themselves in a cartoonish gleam of happiness, would die, just as inexorably, of the same kinds of cancer that had killed them in 1947. But for Farber, the lengthening, deepening remissions bore quite another message. He needed to expand his efforts even further to launch a concerted battle against leukemia, Acute leukemia, he wrote in 1953, has responded to a more marked degree than any other form of cancer to the new chemicals that have been developed within the last few years. Prolongation of life, amelioration of symptoms, and return to a far happier and even a normal life for weeks and many months have been produced by their use. Farber needed a means to stimulate and fund the effort to find even more powerful anti-leukemia drugs. We are pushing ahead as fast as possible, he wrote in another letter, but it was not quite fast enough for him. The money that he had raised in Boston had dwindled to a disturbingly small amount, he noted. He needed a larger drive, a larger platform, and perhaps a larger vision for cancer. He had outgrown the house that Jimmy had built. And that is the end of part 1. Hooray! Okay. So we stop at 105. Part 2 laps to 191. Okay. Alright. My throat needs some healing, so I will stop this right away. Get some much needed rest and so forth. Yo!